A simply furnished room in a farmhouse. The door and the windows in the background open on a landscape. In the middle of the room stands a big dining table, covered at one end by books, writing materials, and antiquities. At the other end by a microscope, insect cases, and specimen jars full of alcohol. On the left side hangs a bookshelf. Otherwise, the furniture is that of a well-to-do farmer. Mr. Y enters in his shirt sleeves, carrying a butterfly net and a botany can. He goes straight up to the bookshelf and takes down a book, which he begins to read on the spot. The landscape outside and the room itself are steeped in sunlight. The ringing of church bells indicates that the morning services are just over. Now and then the cackling of hens is heard from the outside. Mr. X enters, also in his shirt sleeves. Mr. Y starts violently, puts the book back on the shelf upside down, and pretends to be looking for another volume.
This heat is horrible. I guess we are going to have a thunderstorm.
Oh, what makes you think so?
The bells have a kind of dry ring to them. The flies are sticky and the hens cackle. I meant to go fishing, but I couldn't find any worms. Don't you feel nervous?
A little.
Well, for that matter, you always look as if you were expecting thunderstorms.
Do I?
Now, you're going away tomorrow, of course, so it is not to be wondered at that you're a little journey proud. Anything new? Here's the mail. I have palpitations of the heart every time I open a letter. Nothing but debts, debts, debts. Have you ever had any debts?
No.
Well then, you don't know what it means to receive a lot of overdue bills. The rent unpaid, the landlord acting nasty, my wife in despair. And here I am sitting waist high in gold. Just look, here I have 6,000 crowns worth of gold, which I've dug up in the last fortnight. This bracelet alone would bring me the 350 crowns I need. And with all of it, I might make a fine career for myself. Then I could get the illustrations made for my treatise at once. And I could get my work printed and I could travel. Why don't I do it, do you suppose?
I suppose you are afraid to be found out.
That too, perhaps. But don't you think an intelligent fellow like myself might fix matters so that he was never found out? I'm alone all the time, with nobody watching me while I'm out there digging in the fields. It wouldn't be strange if I put something in my own pockets now and then.
Yes, but the danger lies in the disposing of the stuff.
I'd melt it down, of course, every bit of it, and then I'd turn it into coins, with just as much gold in them as genuine ones, of course.
Of course.
Well, you can easily see why. For if I wanted to dabble in counterfeits, then I need not go digging for gold first. It's a strange thing, anyhow, that if anybody else did what I cannot make myself do, then I'd be willing to acquit him. But I couldn't possibly acquit myself. I might even make a brilliant speech in defense of the thief, proving that this gold was res nullius, or nobody's, as it had been deposited at a time when property rights did not exist. That even under existing rights, it could belong only to the first finder of it, as the ground owner has never included it in the valuation of his property, and so on.
And probably it would be much easier for you to do this if the thief had not been prompted by actual need, but by a mania for collecting, for instance, or by scientific aspirations, by the ambition to keep a discovery to himself. Don't you think so?
You mean that I could not acquit him if actual need had been the motive?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, for that's the only motive which the law will not accept in extenuation. That motive makes a plain theft of it.
And this you couldn't excuse.
Oh, excuse. No, I guess not, as the law wouldn't. On the other hand, I must admit that it would be hard for me to charge a collector with theft merely because he had appropriated some specimen not yet represented in his own collection.
So that vanity or ambition might excuse what could not be excused by need?
And yet, need ought to be the more telling excuse. The only one, in fact. But I feel as I have said, and I can no more change this feeling than I can change my own determination not to steal under any circumstances whatever.
And I suppose you count it as a great merit that you cannot steal?
No, my disinclination to steal is just as irresistible as the inclination to do so is irresistible with some people. So it cannot be called a merit. I cannot do it, and the other cannot refrain. But you understand, of course, that I am not without a desire to own this gold. Why don't I take it then? Because I cannot. It's an inability, and the lack of something cannot be called a merit. There.
Gray clouds have cast their shadows on the landscape and darkened the room now and then. Now it grows quite dark as when a thunderstorm is approaching.
How close the air is. I guess the storm is coming all right.
Mr. Y gets up and shuts the doors and all the windows.
Are you afraid of thunder?
It's just as well to be careful.
They resume their seats at the table.
You're a curious chap. Here you come, dropping down like a bomb a fortnight ago, introducing yourself as a Swedish American who's collecting flies for a small museum.
Oh, never mind me now.
That's what you always say when I grow tired of talking about myself and want to turn my attention to you. Perhaps that was the reason why I took to you as I did. Because you let me talk about myself. All at once, we seemed like old friends. There were no angles about you against which I could bump myself. No pins that pricked. There was something soft about your whole person, and you overflowed with that tact that only well-educated people know how to show. You never made a noise when you came home late at night or got up early in the morning. You were patient in small things, and you gave in whenever a conflict seemed threatening. In a word, you proved yourself the perfect companion. But you were entirely too compliant not to set me wondering about you in the long run. And you are too timid, too easily frightened. It seems almost as if you were made up of two different personalities. Why, as I sit here looking at your back in the mirror over there, it is as if I was looking at somebody else.
Mr. Y turns around and stares at the mirror.
No, you cannot get a glimpse of your own back, man. In front, you appear like a fearless sort of fellow, one meeting his fate with bared breast. But from behind, and really, I don't want to be impolite, but you look as if you were carrying a burden, or as if you were crouching to escape a raised stick. And when I look at the red cross your suspenders make on your white shirt, well, it looks to me like some kind of emblem, like a trademark on a packing box.
I feel as if I'd choke if the storm doesn't break soon.
It's coming, don't you worry. And your neck. It looks as if there ought to be another kind of face on top of it. A face quite different in type from yours.
A flash of lightning lights up the room.
Why, it looked as if that might have struck the sheriff's house.
The sheriff's?
Oh, it just looks that way. But I don't think we'll get much of this storm. So sit down now and let us have a talk, as you are going away tomorrow. One thing I find strange is that you, with whom I have become so intimate in this short time, that you are one of those whose image I cannot call up when I'm away from them. When you are not here, and I happen to think of you, I always get the vision of another acquaintance, one who does not resemble you, but with whom you share certain traits in common.
Who is he?
I don't want to name him, but I used for several years to take my meals at a certain place, and there at the side table where they kept the whiskey and the other preliminaries, I met a little blonde man with blonde, faded eyes. He had a wonderful faculty for making his way through a crowd without jostling anybody or being jostled himself. And from his customary place down by the door, he seemed perfectly able to reach whatever he wanted on a table that stood some 6 feet away from him. He seemed always happy just to be in company. But when he met anybody he knew, then the joy of it made him roar with laughter, and he would hug and pat the other fellow as if he hadn't seen a human face for years. When anybody stepped on his foot, he smiled, as if eager to apologize for being in the way. For 2 years, I watched him and amused myself by guessing at his occupation and character. But I never asked who he was. I didn't want to know, you see, for then all the fun would have been spoiled at once. The man had just your quality of being indefinite. At different times, I made him out to be a teacher who never got his license, a non-commissioned officer, a druggist, a government clerk, a detective. And like you, he looked as if made of 2 pieces, for the front of him never quite fitted the back. One day, I happened to read in a newspaper about a big forgery committed by a well-known government official. Then I learned that my indefinite gentleman had been a partner of the forger's brother, and that his name was Strawman. Later on, I learned that the aforesaid Strawman used to run a circulating library, but that he was now the police reporter of a big daily. How in the world could I hope to establish a connection between forgery, the police, and my little man's peculiar manners? It was beyond me. And when I asked a friend whether Strawman had ever been punished for something, my friend couldn't answer either yes or no. He just didn't know.
Well, had he ever been punished?
No, he had not.
And that was the reason you think why the police had such an attraction for him, and why he was so afraid of offending people.
Exactly.
And did you become acquainted with him afterward?
No, I didn't want to.
Would you have been willing to make his acquaintance if he had been punished?
Perfectly. Sit still. Why can't you sit still?
How did you get your liberal view of human conditions? Are you a Christian?
Oh, can't you see that I am not? The Christians require forgiveness, but I require punishment in order that the balance, or whatever you may call it, be restored. And you, who have served a term, ought to know the difference.
How could you know that?
Why, I could see it.
How? How could you see it?
With a little practice. It is an art, like many others. But don't let us talk of it anymore. I must be thinking of my tangled affairs. Won't you please witness my signature on this note here? I'm going to turn it into the bank at Malmo tomorrow when I go to the city with you.
Oh, I am not going by way of Malmo.
Oh, you are not?
No.
But that need not prevent you from witnessing my signature?
No. I never write my name on papers of that kind.
Any longer. This is the 5th time you have refused to write your own name. The first time, nothing more serious was involved than the receipt for a registered letter. But then, I began to watch you. And since then, I have noticed that you have a morbid fear of a pen filled with ink. You have not written a single letter since you came here. Only a postcard, and that you wrote with blue pencil. You understand now that I figured out the exact nature of your slip? Furthermore, this is something like the 7th time you have refused to come with me to Malmo, which place you have not visited at all during this time. And yet, you came the whole way from America merely to have a look at Malmo. And every morning, you walk a couple of miles up to the old mill just to get a glimpse of the roofs of Malmo in the distance. And when you stand over there at the right-hand window and look out through the third pane from the bottom on the left side, you can see the spired turrets of the castle and the tall chimney of the county jail. And now, I hope you see that it's your own stupidity rather than my cleverness which has made everything clear to me.
This means that you despise me?
Oh, no!
Yes, you do. You cannot but do it.
No. Here's my hand. Don't lick hands like a dog.
Pardon me, sir, but you are the first one who has let me touch his hand after learning.
And now you call me sir. What scares me about you is that you don't feel exonerated, washed clean, raised to the old level, as good as anybody else, when you have suffered your punishment. Do you care to tell me how it happened? Would you?
Yes. But you won't believe what I say. But I'll tell you. Then you can see for yourself that I am no ordinary criminal. You'll become convinced, I think, that there are errors which, so to speak, are involuntary, which seem to commit themselves spontaneously without being willed by oneself and for which one cannot be held responsible. May I open the door a little now, since the storm seems to have passed over?
Suit yourself.
He opens the door. Then he sits down at the table and begins to speak.
Yes. I'll tell you. I was a student in the university at Lund, and I needed to get a loan from a bank. I had no pressing debts, and my father owned some property. Not a great deal, of course. However, I had sent the note to the second man of the two who were to act as a security, and contrary to expectations, it came back with a refusal. For a while, I was completely stunned by the blow, for it was a very unpleasant surprise. Most unpleasant. The note was lying in front of me on the table, and the letter lay beside it. At first, my eyes stared hopelessly at those lines that pronounced my doom. That is not a death doom, of course, for I could easily find the other securities, as many as I wanted. But as I have already said, it was very annoying just the same. And as I was sitting there, quite unconscious of any evil intention, my eyes fastened upon the signature of the letter, which would have made my future secure if I had only appeared in the right place. It was an unusually well-written signature. And you know how sometimes one may be absent-mindedly scribbling a sheet of paper full of meaningless words? I had a pen in my hand, like this, and somehow it just began to run. I don't want to claim that there was anything mystical, anything of spiritualistic nature back of it. For that kind of thing, I don't believe in. It was a wholly unreasoned mechanical process. My copying of that beautiful autograph over and over again. When all of the clean space on the letter was used up, I had learned to reproduce the signature automatically, and then I forgot all about it. That night I slept long and heavily, and when I woke up, I could feel that I had been dreaming, but I couldn't recall the dream itself. At times, it was as if a door had been thrown ajar, and then I seemed to see the writing table with the note on it as in a distant memory. And when I got out of bed, I was forced up to the table, just as if after careful deliberation, I had formed an irrevocable decision to sign the name to that fateful paper. All thought of the consequences of the risk involved had disappeared. No hesitation remained. It was almost as if I was fulfilling some sacred duty, and so I wrote. What could it be? What was it? Some kind of outside influence, a case of mental suggestion, as they call it. But from who could it come? I was sleeping alone in that room. Could it possibly be my primitive self, the savage to whom the keeping of faith is an unknown thing, which pushed to the front while my consciousness was asleep, together with the criminal will of that self and its inability to calculate the results of an action? Tell me, what do you think of it?
Frankly speaking, your story does not convince me. There are gaps in it, but these may depend on your failure to recall all the details. And I've read something about criminal suggestion, or I think I have at least. But all that is neither here nor there. You have taken your medicine, and you have had the courage to acknowledge your fault. Now, we won't talk of it anymore.
Yes, we must talk of it, till I become sure of my innocence.
Well, are you not?
No, I am not.
That's just what bothers me, I tell you. It's exactly what is bothering me. Don't you feel fairly sure that every human being hides a skeleton in his closet? Have we not, all of us, stolen and lied as children? Undoubtedly. Well, now there are persons who remain children all their lives so that they cannot control their unlawful desires. Then comes the opportunity, and there you have your criminal. But I cannot understand why you don't feel innocent. If the child is not held responsible, then why should the criminal be regarded differently? It is the more strange because, well, perhaps I may come to repent it later. I, for my part, have killed a man, and I have never suffered any qualms on account of it.
Have you?
Yes, I and no one else. Perhaps you don't care to shake hands with a murderer?
Oh, what nonsense.
Yes, but I have not been punished.
So much the better for you. How did you get out of it?
There was nobody to accuse me, no suspicions, no witnesses. This is the way it happened. One Christmas, I was invited to hunt with a fellow student a little way out of the way of Uppsala. He sent a besotted old coachman to meet me at the station, and this fellow went to sleep on the box, drove the horses into a fence, and upset the whole equipage in a ditch. I'm not going to pretend that my life was in danger. It was sheer impatience which made me hit him across the neck with the edge of my hand, you know the way, just to wake him up. And the result was that he never woke up at all, but collapsed then and there.
And did you report it?
No, and these were my reasons for not doing so. The man left no family behind him, or anybody else to whom his life could be of the slightest use. He had already outlived his allotted period of vegetation, and his place might just as well be filled by somebody more in need of it. On the other hand, my life was necessary to the happiness of my parents and myself, and perhaps also to the progress of my science. The outcome had once for all cured me of any desire to wake up people in that manner, and I didn't care to spoil both my own life and that of my parents for the sake of an abstract principle of justice.
Oh, that's the way you measure the value of a human life?
In the present case, yes.
But the sense of guilt, the balance you were speaking of?
I had no sense of guilt, as I had committed no crime. As a boy, I had given and taken more than one blow of the same kind, and the fatal outcome in this particular case was simply caused by my ignorance of the effect such a blow might have on an elderly person.
Yes, but even the unintentional killing of a man is punished with a 2-year term at hard labor, which is exactly what one gets for writing names.
Oh, you may be sure I have thought of it. More than one night I've dreamt myself in prison. Tell me now, is it really as bad as they say to find oneself behind bolt and bar?
You bet it is. First of all, they disfigure you by cutting off your hair. And if you don't look like a criminal before, you are sure to do so afterward. And when you catch sight of yourself in a mirror, you feel quite sure that you are a regular bandit.
Isn't it a mask that is being torn off, perhaps? Which wouldn't be a bad idea, I should say.
Yes, you can have your little jest about it. And then they cut down your food, so that every day and every hour, you become conscious of the borderline between life and death. Every vital function is more or less checked. You can feel yourself shrinking, and your soul, which was to be cured and improved, is instead put on a starvation diet, pushed back 1,000 years into outlived ages. You are not permitted to read anything but what was written for the savages who took part in the migration of the peoples. You hear of nothing but what will never happen in heaven, and what actually does happen on earth is kept hidden from you. You are torn out of your surroundings, reduced from your own class, put beneath those who are really beneath yourself. Then you get a sense of living in the Bronze Age. You come to feel as if you were dressed in skins, as if you were living in a cave and eating off of a trough.
But there's reason back of all that. One who acts as if he belonged to the Bronze Age might surely be expected to don the proper costume.
Yes, you sneer. You who have behaved like a man from the Stone Age, and who are permitted to live in the Golden Age.
What do you mean with that last expression? The Golden Age.
Nothing at all.
Now you lie, because you are too much of a coward to say all you think.
Am I a coward? You think so? But I was no coward when I dared to show myself around here, or I had to suffer as I did. But can you tell what makes one suffer most while in there? It is that the others are not in there too.
What others?
Those that go unpunished.
Are you thinking of me?
I am.
But I have committed no crime.
Oh, haven't you?
No, a misfortune is no crime.
So it's a misfortune to commit murder?
I have not committed murder.
Is it not murder to kill a person?
Not always. The law speaks of murder, manslaughter, killing in self-defense, and it makes a distinction between intentional and unintentional killing. However, now you really frighten me, for it's becoming plain to me that you belong to the most dangerous of all human groups, that of the stupid.
So you imagine that I am stupid? Well, listen. Would you like me to show you just how clever I am?
Come on.
I think you'll have to admit that there is both logic and wisdom in the argument I am now about to give you. You have suffered a misfortune which might have brought you 2 years at hard labor. You've completely escaped the disgrace of being punished. And here you see before you a man who has also suffered a misfortune, the victim of an unconscious impulse, and who has had to stand 2 years of hard labor for it. Only by some great scientific achievement can this man wipe off the taint that has become attached to him without any fault of his own. But in order to arrive at one such achievement, he must have money. A lot of money. And money this minute. Don't you think that the other one, the unpunished one, would bring a little better balance into these unequal human conditions if he paid a penalty on the form of a fine? Don't you think so?
Yes.
Then we understand each other. What do you think would be reasonable?
Reasonable. The minimum fine in such a case is fixed by the law at 50 crowns. But this whole question is settled by the fact that the dead man left no relatives.
Apparently you don't want to understand. Then I'll have to speak plainly. It is to me you must pay that fine.
I have never heard that forgers have the right to collect fines imposed for manslaughter. And besides, there is no prosecutor.
There isn't? Well, how would I be?
Oh, now we are getting the matter cleared up. How much do you want for becoming my accomplice?
6,000 crowns.
That's too much! And where am I to get them? No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to become a thief.
Oh, don't put on any airs now. Do you think I'll believe that you haven't helped yourself out of that box before?
Think only that I could let myself be fooled so completely. That's the way it is with these soft natures. You like them, and then it's so easy to believe that they like you. And that's the reason why I've always been on my guard against people I take a liking to. So, You are firmly convinced that I've helped myself out of the box before?
Certainly.
And you're going to report me if you don't get 6,000 crowns.
Oh, most decidedly. You can't get out of it, so there's no use trying.
You think I'm going to give my father, a thief for a son, my wife, a thief for a husband, my children, a thief for father, my fellow workers, a thief for colleague? No, that will never happen. Now, I'm going over to the sheriff to report the killing myself.
Wait a moment.
For what?
Oh, I thought, as I am no longer needed, it wouldn't be necessary for me to stay, and I might just as well leave.
No, you may not. Sit down there at the table where you sat before, and we'll have another talk before you go.
What are you up to now?
Oh, now I have it. Oh!
What kind of wonderful things are you discovering now?
I see in the mirror that you are a thief. A plain, ordinary thief. A moment ago, when you had only the white shirt on, I could notice that there was something wrong about my bookshelf. I couldn't make out just what it was, for I had to listen to you and watch you. But as my antipathy increased, my vision became more acute. And now, with your black coats to furnish the needed color contrast for the red back of the book, which before couldn't be seen against the red of your suspenders, now I see that you have been reading about forgeries in Bernheim's work on mental suggestion, for you turned the book upside down in putting it back. So even that story of yours was stolen. For this reason, I think myself entitled to conclude that your crime must have been prompted by need or by mere love of pleasure.
Need? If you only knew.
If you only knew the extent of the need I have had to face and live through. But that's another story. Let's proceed with your case. That you have been in prison, I take that for granted. But it happened in America, for it was American prison life you described. Another thing may also be taken for granted, namely that you have not borne your punishment on this side.
How can you imagine anything of the kind?
Wait until the sheriff gets here and you'll learn all about it. There, you see? The first time I mentioned the sheriff in connection with the storm, you wanted also to run away. And when a person has served out his time, he doesn't care to visit an old mill every day just to look at a prison or to stand by the window. In a word, you are at once punished and unpunished. And that's why it was so hard to make you out.
May I go now?
Now you can go.
Are you angry at me?
Yes. Would you prefer me to pity you?
Pity. Do you think you're any better than I?
Of course I do, as I am better than you. I am wiser, and I am less of a menace to prevailing property rights.
You think you are clever. But perhaps I am as clever as you. For the moment you have me checked. But in the next move I can mate you, all the same.
So, we have to have another bout. What kind of mischief are you up to now?
That's my secret.
Just look at me. Oh. You mean to write my wife an anonymous letter giving away my secret?
Well, how are you going to prevent it? You don't dare to have me arrested. So you'll have to let me go. And when I am gone, I can do what I please.
You devil! So you found my vulnerable spot. Do you want to make a real murderer out of me?
That's more than you'll ever become.
There, you
Coward.
see how different people you are. You have a feeling that I cannot become guilty of the same kind of acts as you. And that gives you the upper hand. But suppose you force me to treat you as I treated that coachman.
You can't. It's too much for one who couldn't save himself by means of the box over there.
So you don't think I've taken anything out of the box?
You were too cowardly, just as you were too cowardly to tell your wife she had married a murderer.
You are a different man from what I took you to be. If stronger or weaker, I cannot tell. If more criminal or less, that's none of my concern. But decidedly more stupid. That much is quite plain. For stupid you were when you wrote another person's name instead of begging, as I have had to do. Stupid you were when you stole things out of my book. Did you not guess that I might have read my own books? Stupid you were when you thought yourself cleverer than me, and when you thought that I could be lured into becoming a thief. Stupid you were when you thought balance could be restored by giving the world 2 thieves instead of 1. But most stupid of all you were when you thought I had failed to provide a safe cornerstone for my happiness. Go ahead and write my wife as many anonymous letters as you please about her husband having killed a man. She knew that long before we were married. Have you had enough now?
May I go?
Now you have to go. And at once. I'll send your things after you. Get out of here!